Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Jaya Shri Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Jayo Radha Madhav, Jayo Radha Madhav, Radha Madhav, Jayo Radha Madhav, Jayo.
Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa Paribrajakacharya Stotara Satya Shri Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shama Kunda Radha Kundi Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Ki Jai Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we're reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Volume 1, by His Holiness Satsvarup Das Goswami. We're continuing Chapter 9, A Resident of Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada, he's made his second trip now to Bombay, and he's looking for a residence. He had approached Sri Harbans Lal, but Harbans Lal was out of the country. And then he came to the Gaudiya Math that he had helped to establish a few years earlier, and he spoke to his godbrother Kripa Sindhu Das. Kripa Sindhu took him to one industrialist, Hemraj Kandalwala, who was not interested in helping Prabhupada. Now we'll continue. Kripa Sindhu told Abai of how the Gaudiya Math in Bombay had sometimes been assisted by a pious business magnate, Mrs. Sumati Morarji, head of Scindia Steamship Lines. Abai tried to see her but was unable. He did, however, see one of Mrs. Morarji's employees, a deputy manager for the Scindia company, who heard him out and, to Abai's surprise, responded generously. Considering Abai a genuine sadhu, the Scindia agent offered him a 50% concession on a voyage from India to the United States. He even put it in writing. Abai immediately began arranging for his passport and visa, but he could not raise even half the fare. So this is a very important contact that Srila Prabhupada has made. The gentleman's name is Mr. Chokshi, and he's the right-hand man to Srimati Sumati Murarji. Now here, Satsrup Maharaj describes her as a pious business magnate. Well, it so happened that she happened to be one of the wealthiest women in all of India. She was world famous as being the only woman who ran a shipping company, and her shipping company was one of the most successful in the whole world. She had 43 ships. At a very early age, her family, they were Ballabhacharya Vaishnavas. Her name originally was Jamuna, named after the Jamuna River. And from childhood, she was a very, very devoted lover of Bal Krishna. At an early age, she was married to another very, very wealthy family, but she and her husband didn't match. They lived in separate buildings, they never had children, but they ran the business together. She ran one portion of the business, and he ran another portion of the business. From age 14, she was engaged in this Scindia steamships. So by this time, oh, and she was also one of the closest associates to Mahatma Gandhi. In her, let's say, the mission statement of the Scindia steamships, she expressed that not only do we send merchandise from India all over the world, but we're interested in sending Indian culture all over the world, because that is the greatest treasure of India. So she had the exact same idea that Srila Prabhupada had, that of all of India's wealth, its culture is the greatest. So although in this particular time, he was unable to meet Sumati Murarji, and he had gone several times, Mr. Chokshi would only speak on his behalf to her. But now, Mr. Chokshi, in this first meeting, he's offering 50% concession. Prabhupada, he had a few hoops to jump through. He had to get a passport. He had to get sponsorship to get a visa for America. In those days, both the Indian government and the American government, they were not on the best of terms. And India would not allow any money out of the country. And in order for any Indian to go to America, because how can you land in a wealthy country without any money, they had to have a sponsor who was going to take care of all of their financial needs. So Prabhupada had to find a sponsor. And then he had to get something called a P form. A P form means that the Reserve Bank of India acknowledges that there are no, like nowadays we have all of these people making huge loans and then taking all the money and leaving the country. So in those days there was a P form confirming that you didn't have any loans on your name, that you were clear according to the Reserve Bank of India. So these were very big hurdles for Prabhupada, how to get all of these things. He didn't have any money. He couldn't raise even the fare for the ship. So he decided to return to Vrindavan. Back in 1956 in Delhi, he had been struggling and homeless. And now, as he considered his last 2 years of traveling out of Vrindavan, he felt that his position hadn't really improved. Perhaps Krishna didn't want him to succeed in this way. But one positive thing he had gained: determination to go to the West and preach. There he would surely meet with success. So during these 2 years, from 1956 to 1958, we spent about 3 or 4 weeks during these 2-year times when Srila Prabhupada, because his only disciple, Acharya Prabhakar, had been caught up in the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, he invited Prabhupada to come. They tried to set up the League of Devotees very nicely. It was going quite well. And Prabhupada was making a lot of contacts that would later help him. Then, when Acharya Prabhakar was transferred, he went to Kanpur. He made very good contacts there, picking up from his business associates. So he already had some standing in Kanpur. And he began to lecture. He began to collect more members. And then in Delhi, in order to print his Back to Godhead magazine, he was still coming and going. And in between, he would stop off at his place at the Bansi Gopal temple in Vrindavan. Now Prabhupada has decided that possibly 2 years of struggling like this, traveling and preaching, perhaps this is not the way he's going to accomplish his mission of going to America. Alone and poor, Abba returned to Vrindavan. He was 62, but he wasn't thinking of retiring. More than ever, his mood was reflective and renounced. Because few people knew him, and because he wanted to write, he kept to himself. Yes, Srila Prabhupada, he kept to himself. But he was seeing what was going on in Vrindavan. And although the situation was perfect, he lived a very solitary life, no responsibilities other than carrying out the mission of his spiritual master. He was seeing how the Vaishnavas were living in Vrindavan. And he was taking note of the fact that there was casteism, there were sahajiyas, there were many things going on. There were many people engaged in nirjana bhajan, but not actually on the level of that as the Goswamis. So all of this was becoming more and more evident to Srila Prabhupada as he spent more time in Vrindavan. He enjoyed deep peace as a resident of Vrindavan. Outside his window, the sacred Jamuna flowed by in a peaceful panorama for his private audience. The Keshigat neighborhood was quiet, though in the pre-dawn he could hear a few devotees bathing and chanting. When the moon was full, the river seemed like a coolly resplendent jewel. And in the morning the sun would appear like a red smudge, a fire burning through an opaque wall, at last bursting forth and clearing the entire sky, until in the hot blaze of noon, while the room would be in shadows, Abhay could see from his window a shimmering sun high in the sky and glittering across the silver sheet of the gentle river. Now this was the autumn time of 1958, so it wasn't so hot then. Prabhupada was able to be quite comfortable because he was on the roof. There's just one room, and then the rest of the roof, Prabhupada would able to chant on the veranda, walk back and forth. He would have to use a rope to pull water up all the way from the well that was way down at the bottom. There was no electricity. Electricity didn't come until 1965 to Vrindavan. So he had an oil burner, kerosene. That's how we all used to live in those days. We'd have our kerosene lamps. We'd have our little kerosene stove. Without electricity, that's how you had to live, no gas. Without so much as leaving his room, from his doorway, he could see hundreds of temples clustered together for miles in the friendly town of Vrindavan. The various punctual kirtans and bell ringings in the temples, the spontaneous songs to Lord Krishna in numerous homes and in the streets rose and filled the air with devotion. Now also at this time, because Srila Prabhupada was right at a corner, on this side was the Keshigat And then on this side were the temples of Radha Gokulananda, Radha Raman, then further was Nidhiban, then Radha Gopinath, right in the center of all the spiritual activities of the very cluster of so many famous temples. And Prabhupada was seeing all the beautiful temples. He noticed one place right on Keshi Ghat called the Lakshmi Rani Kunj Palace. It wasn't exactly a temple, it was the residence of the Maharaj of Bharatpur and his family when they came here to Vrindavan. So Srila Prabhupada took note of that, and later he tried to acquire that place. Now, there was some time, it was a few years later, I want to bring this up because this relationship with Sumati Morarji was very important for Prabhupada. We know she sponsored his ticket entirely. She took very good care of him. And she would also travel all over. She had been to Mayapur, she had been to Katwa, she had been to Chittagong. Because of all of her ships, she was free to go wherever she wanted. She went to America. So she met up with Prabhupada in London one year. It was just the time when Prabhupada had signed the papers for Juhu. And they were having a private conversation together. I found this conversation this week. It was in Hindi mostly, because they were talking, how is your health? Oh, I'm having a little problems. I can only eat some fruit and milk, Prabhupada's telling her. Oh, with your milk you have to take some dry ginger, you have to roast it, you have to put some kesher, just like a mother. She was telling Prabhupada how he should take care of his health. Then in English she was telling the devotees how to make it. And then Prabhupada, he said, we want to make a trust in Bombay. And we want you to be the president of that trust. She said, yes. She immediately agreed. So trust means, Prabhupada explained afterwards, as a trustee, it means that they collect funds. It doesn't mean that they have any responsibility in the temple. But she was willing to do that. And then she said, I want your devotees to come. I have a school. I want them to come and give classes there. I want all of your little children to come and I'll have them get Manipuri dance classes. She wanted a whole culture exchange with Prabhupada. And then Prabhupada explained to the devotees sitting there that actually Sumati Morarji, she is the mother of our ISKCON. And then she said, and you are the father. So everyone cheered at that. So she was very important in the development. And then when she did send Prabhupada, because Prabhupada also, just as in Bombay, he wasn't having so much success. He was alone and also penniless. He would sell some of his books, and from those book sales he was able to maintain himself. But America was a very expensive country. He wrote to his godbrother once that for 200 grams of sarson tel, mustard oil, I have to pay $5. So it was very difficult for Srila Prabhupada. So every 2 weeks he would go to the Scindia steamship office to ask when the next ship was going back. And there was an old man living there, working there. And finally, after Prabhupada came a few times, he wrote to Sumati Morarji that, what should I do? Should I give him a ticket back? And she said, you just wait, because I want him to stay until he's successful. And then if he wants to come back, you look for a ship that has a very good captain, because the first ship, the captain was a Brahmin, Mr. Pandey, and his wife was an excellent astrologer. And she read Prabhupada's hand. She said, if you live past 71, then you will live for many, many years. And when he was 71, that was when he had his stroke. So Prabhupada and Sumati Morarji together, she was always trying to help Prabhupada. Although, unfortunately, at this Bombay meeting, he couldn't meet her. It was only when he came the third time. On the veranda, Abai could chant japa, and there would be no interruption. He enjoyed a simple, almost carefree life of minimized physical wants, a few hours of rest at night, a little prasadam at noon, the simplest clothing. And he did not have to flatter anyone, support anyone, or manage anyone's life. He's in Vanaprasth now, living in the forest of Vrindavan. He had given up his family ties. His mind and intelligence were free and dwelt constantly on his service to his spiritual master. He saw his present circumstances as a preparation for a greater task before him. Despite his advanced age, he was about 62 at this time, he felt that he had barely begun his work. Yet he felt confident. He had his vision of a world association of devotees. It was not an idle dream, although he was not certain how it would all come about. But he knew his duty. For the present, he would go on describing his vision, the vision of his predecessor spiritual masters, in articles and books. So this was the time Srila Prabhupada began very seriously writing. We heard previously, just like in the Hindi class we just had, the godbrothers of Srila Prabhupada very much understood how qualified he was as an English writer. And they would take his services for the Sajjana Toshani, for the Gaudiya Patrika, both in English, in Hindi, and in Bengali. So Prabhupada was assisting his godbrothers in that way by writing. But this wasn't going to help him with the order that his spiritual master had given him. At one time in 1935, Srila Prabhupada wrote the beautiful Vyasa Puja offering in English to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Now, Prabhupada, being alone and seeing that he was going to have books. If he was going to America, he was going to have books in English for the people. So he became determined now to write books. For the present, he would go on describing his vision, the vision of his predecessor spiritual masters, in articles and books. But as soon as possible, he should go to the West. Westerners, he had concluded, were not satisfied with a material, comfortable life, devoid of spiritual understanding. More than his fellow Indians, they would be open to the message of the absolute truth. He knew he should go, and he would go, if Krishna desired. Last week we described the mood of the Indian leaders at that time, where they were rejecting the Vedic culture and replacing it with industrialization. They wanted to turn the temples into the factories, and they wanted to make the factories into the temples that workers worship. And they also were suspicious of sadhus, how they were getting money and what they were using that money for. So Prabhupada, despite all of his efforts, he was not able to have much success here in India. And he felt doubly, for that reason, doubly assured that he would have success preaching in the Western English-speaking countries. Abai lived frugally in Vrindavan, keeping exact account of every expenditure and every receipt. He carefully kept a ledger, just as if he were running a substantial business, even though his purchases were only a little milk, a few vegetables, charcoal for cooking, bus rides, and his major expenditure, postage. Because Srila Prabhupada, we've gone through now 3 of his major letters, he was preaching through the mail. Abai composed a Bengali poem, Vrindavan Bhajan. In its opening stanzas were especially self-reflective and personal. Now, Satsvarup Maharaj, there's a book here that was recently printed by BBT. It's called A Shower of Divine Compassion. This book took 12 years for the author to compile. It was, the poems of Srila Prabhupada were translated by one of our godbrothers, Dasarath Sutta, who lived here in Vrindavan and collected as much material as he could, learning Bengali, learning Sanskrit, so that he could translate Srila Prabhupada's books. So in 12 years, he was able to make this translation. And he very, very diligently tried to capture the mood of Srila Prabhupada. Satsvarup Maharaj, he wrote an introduction, a preface to this book. And he explained that when writing Shastra, the writer is the master, and the person who's reading, the pupil, the student, they have to take the command of the master. There's no questioning, because it's Shastra. That's one form of writing. Just as when we read Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam. Then there's history. History is like the writing of a friend to another friend. The friend tells some stories, and from the stories he's able to give some philosophical understanding to his friend. Then there's poetry. Poetry is the expression of a lover to one's beloved. Because in poetry, poetry expresses one's heart, so that those who are dear to that poet can understand what's in the heart of the poet. And poetry is best to be written in one's native language, because you can express yourself best in your mother tongue. So that first poem that Prabhupada wrote, that was in English for his spiritual master. Now this is the first Bengali poem that Srila Prabhupada wrote. The Bengali is absolutely beautiful. There's no way to translate it. Satsvarup Maharaj says that when so-called translating poetry, it's not actually a translation. It is a rendition, because you can't translate exactly, because there are nuances in one's mother tongue that cannot be brought over to another language, that no one would even understand. And as we go through this poem, you'll see exactly, because there are things in Bengali that just don't make any sense in English. When Prabhupada is coming down heavily, I'll just give you one example. He's coming down heavily upon the Nirjan Bhajananandis. He said it's just like eating the mind's bananas. Now, eating the mind's bananas doesn't make any sense in English. But what it means in Bengali is that they're meditating in all the pastimes of the Supreme Lord, trying to enter into them, trying to taste the sweetness in their mind. But they can't enter. It's just like if you're meditating on eating a banana. You can't taste the banana. You don't get any nourishment from the banana. It's just imagination. So as we read on, and one may ask, why take so much time to read this poem? Well, as we read it, you'll understand. And Satsvarup Maharaj, today he wrote to me, because he's not able to come to Vrindavan now. Although he spent many, many years here writing his books. Now he can't walk anymore, he's in a wheelchair. And with Parkinson's disease and other frailties, he can't come to India now. So he has named his home Viraha Bhavan, that he's serving Vrindavan in separation. And he sent one quotation from the Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 5:22:60. The devotee should always think of Krishna within himself and choose a very dear devotee who is a servitor of Krishna in Vrindavan. One should constantly engage in topics about that servitor and his loving relationship with Krishna. And one should live in Vrindavan. If one is unable to live in Vrindavan, he should mentally live there. So Satsvarup Maharaj was lamenting that I have not yet found a resident of Vrindavan whose service I can meditate on. But we know who that servitor is. That's Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada is a resident, eternal resident of Vrindavan, who was sent here by Krishna to push on the movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And when we engage in topics about that servitor and his loving relationship with Krishna while living in Vrindavan, that is the supreme perfection of our devotional service. So here, for the first time, Prabhupada now, in 1 year, we started these classes on May 9th, 2022. So it's been just a little over 1 year. We've covered 62 years of Srila Prabhupada's life. It's very super fast. Now we're going to slow down, because now Srila Prabhupada, he's free. He's free to actually preach Krishna consciousness. And this poem is so super excellent. It's like his manifesto of what he's going to do and how he's going to do it. So we should study this very carefully. We might not be able to finish it today, but it's 108 couplets. A couplet means 2 lines. And it's divided into 27 different sections. And each section has 4 sets of couplets, or 8 lines. And the Bengali is so beautiful. Even if you can't understand Bengali, just from reading Prabhupada's books and hearing the Sanskrit slokas every day, you'll be able to catch up many of the things that Prabhupada's trying to say. Now, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he predicted that the foreigners would one day learn Bengali just so that they could read Chaitanya Charitamrita and Chaitanya Bhagavat. So amongst Prabhupada's disciples, many of us have over the years very, very diligently tried to learn Bengali. Sanskrit is a perfect language. There are no irregularities because it's Devanagari. It's coming from the demigods. It's the perfect original language. Bengali, though it's derived from Sanskrit because it's a spoken language, there's so many different dialects of Bengali. In India itself, all the languages that are spoken, there are over 19,000 different dialects. We know that. Every place you go, there's a different form of Hindi spoken. And the same with Bengali. You go to East Bengal, so many different dialects there. West Bengal, of course, Assam has their own form of Bengali language. Then Tripura, all these different places, they have different dialects. So Srila Prabhupada, in the simplest, so that anyone can understand his Bengali, he has made this poem, and we're asking Dharmatma Prabhu to read one section of 8 lines at a time. He can sing it.
বৃন্দাবন ধামে আমি বসে আছি একা, এ ভাবনা মধ্যে মধ্যে দেয় মোরে দেখা। আছে মোর স্ত্রী পুত্র কন্যা নাতি সব, কিন্তু অর্থ নাই বলি বিফল বৈভব। প্রকৃতির নগ্ন রূপ দেখালে শ্রীকৃষ্ণ, তব কৃপা বলে আজ হয়েছি বিতৃষ্ণ। যস্যাহম অনুগ্রহামি হরিষ্যে তদ্ধনম শনৈ।
Okay. The last line was Sanskrit. It was the line that Srila Prabhupada kept in his heart from Canto 10, chapter 88, verse 8. When Krishna tells Yudhisthira was wondering why they were suffering so much. And Krishna explains, when I really favor a devotee, I take everything away from him. Then his family members, his friends, everyone rejects him, and he has no other shelter but the association of devotees and my lotus feet. So the translation of this is, I am sitting alone in the transcendental abode of Sri Vrindavan Dham. This is Prabhupada sitting at Bansi Gopal Temple. While in this mood of contemplation, many realizations have been coming to me. Although I have my wife and sons, daughters, grandsons, everyone, here it says here, Stri Putra Kanya Nati. He has everything. They all consider me to be a total failure in life, simply because I have no money. His wife went back to her father, very wealthy man. She was living in comfort there. The children would just come to steal money from Prabhupada, but he had no money anymore, so they didn't come to see him anymore. Oh, Sri Krishna, you have shown me the naked form of material nature. Here it is. Prakritir Nagna Rup. Dekhala. By the power of your mercy upon me today, I have become disgusted with it all. So here Prabhupada is having very deep So who is he speaking to? Oh, Sri Krishna. This poem is addressed to Krishna. He's opening his heart to his beloved Sri Krishna. And we're able to take part in this dialogue between Prabhupada and Krishna. You have stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam 1088:8, I gradually take away all the wealth of those to whom I show my favor. How can I comprehend such mercy of the all-merciful Lord?
কৃপাময়ের এই কৃপা বুঝিলাম কই, অর্থহীন দেখি মোরে ছেড়েছে সবাই, কুটুম্ব আত্মীয় আর বন্ধুজন ভাই। দুঃখ হয় হাসি পায় একা বসি হাসি, মায়ার সংসার এই কাকে ভালোবাসি। কোথা গেল মাতা পিতা আর স্নেহময়, কোথা গেল জ্যেষ্ঠ যারা স্বজনাদি হয়, তাদের খবর কেবা দেবে মোরে বলো, নামে মাত্র তাদের সংসার রয়ে গেল।
So here's, Prabhupada will say later, actually he's laughing. He's asking, where is everyone now? This section 2 is called A List of Names. Seeing that I am penniless, everyone has now abandoned me. My own family, my other relatives, and even my so-called friends. This situation is indeed miserable, but it simply amuses me. I sit alone and laugh. In this mundane material world, who are my loved ones? Where have my affectionate father and mother gone now? And where are all my elders and other relatives who were my own folk? Who will give me news of them now? I ask you, tell me who. All that is left of this so-called family is a list of names. So as each one of us grow older, now I'm in the 70s category. So when you get past 70, your parents have died, all the relatives have died, maybe even your brothers and sisters have died, but the mind is remembering them all, as if they're still with you. You're remembering the things you used to do with them, and then, because we're devotees, that this is just Maya, it's just illusion, these people don't even exist anymore, and still you're thinking of them. So Srila Prabhupada, he was remembering my mother, my father, my friends, where are they all now? And he was laughing. Now, the section 3 will explain why he's laughing.
সমুদ্রের ফেনা যেন ক্ষণে সৃষ্টি ক্ষণে লয়, মায়ারও সংসারে খেলা সেইভাবে হয়। কেহ নহে পিতা মাতা আত্মীয় স্বজন, সবাই ফেনার মতো থাকে অল্পক্ষণ। সমুদ্রের ফেনা যেমন সমুদ্রে মিশয়, পঞ্চভূতের দেহ তথা হয়ে যায় লয়। কত দেহ এইভাবে ধরো এ শরীরী, অনিত্য শরীরে মাত্র আত্মীয় তাহারি।
So this is the realization of a devotee. He says this section is called Froth on the Seawater. The froth upon the seawater arises one moment and disappears the next. That's the fena. The play of Maya's worldly illusion is exactly like that. No one is actually a mother or father, a family member or relative. Everyone is just like the froth on the seawater, existing only for a moment. Just as the froth on the seawater dissolves again into the sea, the body made of 5 material elements merges again with these elements after it dies. How many fleeting forms does the embodied soul take in this manner? His so-called family members are only related to this temporary external body. So Prabhupada, having been brought up by a Vaishnava father, then meeting his spiritual master, his whole life he never forgot Krishna. And now that he's broken off his family relations and he's alone here in the holy Dham of Vrindavan, he's realizing the worthlessness of the toil of trying to maintain the family members, thinking that they have anything to do with our real goal in life. Because now Srila Prabhupada is free from all of that. And he compares it to just the bubbles, the froth on the sea that enters back into the sea, and he explains that that's not Mayavad philosophy, that the Atma disappears into the ocean. He's explaining that the 5 material elements that make up the body, that's what dissolves. Because this body, from ashes to ashes, from dust to dust, however we die, it can become the stool of worms, it can become ash, or it can become soil again, this body. And we're so attached to this body, and we're so attached to the extensions of our body. But now while Prabhupada's sitting alone in Vrindavan, he's realizing all of these bodily relationships, they just come and go like the froth on the ocean. Now section 4.
আত্মীয় সবাই ভাই আত্মারও সম্বন্ধে, আত্মীয়তা নাহি হয় মায়াময় গন্ধে। সকলের আত্মা যিনি স্বয়ং ভগবান, তাহারও সম্বন্ধে বিশ্বে সবাই সমান। আত্মীয় তোমার ভাই যত জীব কোটি, কৃষ্ণেরও সম্বন্ধে তারা হয় পরিপাটি। কৃষ্ণ ভুলে সেই যে ভোগবাঞ্ছা করে, মায়ারও সংসারও তাই ঝাপটিয়া ধরে।
So these last 2 lines there, Jagadananda Pandit in, what's the name of the book? Prema Vivarta. That we're trying to enjoy this material nature, but we're just getting slapped and pulled and pushed and habu dabu, Prabhupada calls it later. When the punishment, you get pushed down into the water till you're just about to die, then you're pulled up again, you take a breath of air, and then you're pushed down again. So it's all misery, but when we have just a moment of pleasure, we're thinking, oh, it's worth it. So the translation of this section 4, which is called Eternal Spiritual Relatives. Oh, brothers, now he's speaking to us, to the audience. All of us are actually relatives, but only on the platform of pure spirit soul. These eternal relationships are not tinged with the temporary delusions of Maya. The Supreme Lord is himself the ultimate soul of everyone. In their eternal relation to him, all souls in the universe are equal. Oh brothers, all the millions of spirit souls are your personal relatives. This is the vision of the Vaishnavas, Samadarshini. They see everyone equally. The bug. Prabhupada would, one night he was sitting in his room upstairs here, very intently looking at something. Bhagaji came in the room, and Bhagaji was his dear friend. Prabhupada was looking at a mosquito, and he said to Prabhupada said to Bhagaji, he said, you look at this mosquito. It is so perfect. It can fly, it can go up, down, any direction. Not only can it fly anywhere at once, but it reproduces other mosquitoes. Then Prabhupada, he said, have we been able to do that? We can make an airplane with so much difficulty, fuel, expense, we can get it to go up in the sky, but it cannot reproduce itself. So Srila Prabhupada even, and then a little bug, he saw that a bug, it was on the floor. So he had, I think it was Shrudakirti, he had him pick up the bug. He said, this bug is very thirsty and hungry. You take it outside and put it on a flower. So this is the compassion of a Vaishnava. Even the bugs, they saw as jivas. These eternal relationships are not tinged with the temporary delusions of Maya. The Supreme Lord, yes, oh brothers, all the millions of spirit souls are your personal relatives. In their true relationship with Krishna, they all coexist in complete harmony. Forgetting Krishna, the living entity desires personal enjoyment separate from his self. That's from Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 21:17. Thus the spirit soul enters the temporary material world and falls into the powerful clutches of Maya. Now, it's hard to believe, but in the spiritual world, there's no envy, there's no hatred. For instance, snakes, tigers. They're very ferocious, very envious by nature. There are also tigers and snakes in the spiritual world, but the tigers are friendly. Prabhupada's godbrother used to be our cook here, very old brahmachari from Orissa. And he told us that when he first came to Vrindavan, which by now, then it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, there were still tigers roaming here. So anyone who lived in ashrams, they would take a bowl of milk and put the milk out so that the tiger could drink the milk. They were even feeding the tigers. So that's Vaishnava mentality. So one devotee asked Prabhupada that, are there actually tigers in the spiritual world? He said, yes, but they're friendly. They're Vaishnavas. And the snakes also. The snakes take part in Krishna and Radharani's pastimes. One time Krishna was waiting for Radharani on the path, and she was walking along the path, and he came to attack her, and she quickly ran away from him because already her reputation had been ruined. She didn't want to get it even worse ruined, so she ran away from him. Then as she ran away, she saw a big black snake on the path. And then she got so scared that she ran back and ran into Krishna's arms. So the snakes also, they take part in Krishna's pastimes in that way. Many different ways. You'll read about the snakes. Now, section 5.
কর্ম ফলে আসে সব নানা বেশ ধরি, বেশেতে মজিয়া থাকে ভুলিয়া শ্রীহরি। অতএব মায়া তারে দেয় বহু দুঃখ, দুঃখে হাবুডুবু তবু তাহে মানে সুখ। চিররোগী দুঃখ ভোগী শয্যাতে শুইয়া, ভালো আছি আজ কহে হাসিয়া হাসিয়া। হাসি পায় তার ভালো থাকার কথায়, মায়াবদ্ধ জীবের ভালো এইভাবে হয়।
So this section is the beginning of Prabhupada's, just like when you go onto a diving board and you're just about to jump, and then so Prabhupada is just beginning his attack now of what he's seeing wrong here. As a result of accumulated fruitive reactions, all the fallen souls accept various bodily forms. Becoming engrossed in these material disguises, they completely forget about their Lord, Sri Hari. Therefore, Maya provides the embodied souls with a great variety of material miseries. But as they rise and sink in the wretched waves of suffering, they still imagine this experience to be enjoyment. So this is this habu-dabu that's here, that you're pushed down, you come up, and you're, oh, I'm up for a while, okay, now I'm happy. Then you get pushed down again. So that's the type of enjoyment we're experiencing, and all of us have our life stories to agree with this. A chronically ill patient lies upon his bed, miserably suffering intense pain. But he smiles and laughs as he tells his visitors, "Today I'm doing fine." Like you'll go to someone's tied up in the hospital, they can't move. You come to visit them during visitors' hours. "How are you?" "Oh, I'm doing much better today." Can't eat, can't move. Can't even take care of himself. "I'm much better today." All his talk about doing fine really makes me laugh aloud. This is the find of the spirit soul, who is totally bound up in Maya's gross illusion. Now Prabhupada's getting heavy.
কত প্ল্যান করে তারা ভালো থাকিবারে, প্রকৃতি ভাঙিয়া দেয় সব বারে বারে। দৈবী হেষা গুণময়ী ভগবানের মায়া, ভালো থাকার অর্থ বুঝো ভালো করে ভায়া। কেহ ভালো নাই হেথা তবু ভালো বলে, এইভাবে মায়া সব বদ্ধ জীবে ছলে। ছলনায় ভুলি জীব সর্বদা মশগুল, মায়া লাগি মরে তবু ভাঙে না কো ভুল।
Okay, now this section number 6 is called Plans for Doing Fine. Another reason I'm reading this is actually this book is very hard to get a hold of. It's always out of print. Because as soon as they print it, they all get sold. And it's practically impossible to get a proper translation of this poem. Sri Jayapataka Swami, he made a translation, but that also is very difficult. So I'm hoping that at least in this one class, we get an opportunity to hear this wonderful poem together. So this Prabhupada doesn't call it this. This is the sections that it was broken up by Dasarath Sutta so that we could understand these 8 lines and what the topic of each 8 lines is. So he calls it Plans for Doing Fine. They make a great many plans. Now here also in the Bengali, it's called Koto Plan Kare. How many plans are you going to make? To live comfortably in this world, doing fine. But material nature smashes all of their arrangements one after another. The Lord's Maya is divine energy consisting of the three modes of material nature. Bhagavad Gita 7:14. Oh brothers, please try to understand the reality of this illusion of supposedly doing fine. Although no one is actually fine here in this world, one persists in saying, I am fine. In this way, Maya completely deceives the conditioned souls within her grasp. Being enchanted by Maya's deception, these souls remain perpetually engrossed in illusion. Although Maya severely kicks them during their attempts to enjoy, they still refuse to give up their enchantment. Now, there's one very interesting thing. It's not that, because remember, Prabhupada's in Vanaprasth now. It's not that Srila Prabhupada is deriding Grihastha life. Because in Grihastha life, you have to become attached, otherwise what's the use of maintaining the family? Prabhupada explains that the companies, they only like to hire married men because they know that the married men have responsibility to their family, so they'll work because they have to have money to maintain their family. So later on, Prabhupada will explain that there's nothing wrong with Grihastha life and maintaining your responsibilities so long as those responsibilities are being done for Krishna. And he gives the example of Arjuna. So he's not deriding attachments when they're being used in Krishna's service, as in the case of the Pandavas. Section 7.
বারবার প্ল্যান করি বারবার ভাঙে কখন ভূমিতে পড়ে কখনো তো পঙ্কে এইরূপ ব্রহ্মাণ্ড ভরি করো এ ভ্রমণ গুরু কৃষ্ণ কৃপায় পাই ভক্তি নিত্য ধন সেই ধন মিলে যদি আর ধন ছাড়ে অনায়াসে চলে যায় সংসারের পারে ভব পারে আছে চিদ বৈচিত্র্য অপার নিত্য শান্তি নিত্য সুখে করো এ বিহার
Prabhupada's giving a way out. The gift of bhakti. Again and again they make their plans, which again and again are thwarted. Sometimes they fall upon the hard, dry earth, and sometimes they fall in the soft, wet mud. Prabhupada gives another example that the wet stool and the dry stool. On the top it's become dry, and on the bottom it's still wet. So the dry stool is thinking that I'm much better than the wet stool. It's all stool, that's all. So sometimes in their plans, in their defeat, because they're always going to be defeated because there's always death, sometimes they fall on the hard ground, sometimes they fall right in the mud. In either case, all their plans eventually are defeated. In this way, the fallen souls wander throughout the egg-like material universe until eventually, by the causeless mercy of Guru and Krishna, they receive the eternal treasure of devotional service. So Srila Prabhupada paraphrased this in simpler Bengali because we Brahmanda Brahmite Konya Bhagavan Jeev Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti Lata Bij. So that's the sloka in Chaitanya Charitamrita. And Prabhupada made it even simpler. Erupa Brahmanda Bhari Karaya Brahmana. Same thing, but it's the way people speak. Guru Krishna Kripai Pai Bhakti Nitya Dana. It's the eternal treasure. Upon receiving that divine treasure of bhakti, if they reject all mundane ideas of treasure, they can very easily travel beyond the temporary material sphere. Now we heard when Prabhupada was in Jhansi and the place was being taken away from him, and the manager said, if you can just raise 4,000 rupees, then we can make a contract with you. Prabhupada went back to his home, tried to raise the money, he was unsuccessful. Even when he first met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was thinking, let me become a very successful businessman, I'll make a lot of money, and then I'll be able to use that money in my Guru Maharaj's service. Everything failed. Everything. Krishna, he could have been, according to his astrology, could have been the most famous, the most successful businessman in the chemistry industry. But Krishna didn't want it because of that sloka in the 10th canto. Krishna took everything away from Prabhupada. And now, after these last 2 years of again trying, he's come to these realizations that he's sharing with us. Beyond the limited world of dull matter exist spiritual wonders in limitless variety. Everyone living there is truly enjoying eternal peace and everlasting happiness. So when you hit rock bottom, as Prabhupada has hit now, all alone, penniless, very simple life, there's nowhere else to fall. Only you can come up after that. So Sri Krishna, by his causeless mercy, has put Prabhupada in Vrindavan in this completely poverty-stricken situation. And now, without trying for any more mundane ideas of treasure, Prabhupada is understanding, which he always understood, but he was trying to be dutiful, understanding the treasure of the spiritual world and the eternal peace and everlasting happiness there. Section 8.
বাতুল কহয়ে সেথা সব নিরাকার, নির্বিশেষ তিনি যেন শূন্যেরও প্রকার। রসেরও ভাণ্ডারী তিনি রস বৈষ, রসিক ভাবুক সেবে হই তাঁর বশ। শান্ত দাস্য সখ্য বাৎসল্য রস আর, সর্বরস শ্রেষ্ঠ মাধুর্য রসসার। চিদ জগতে রস সব হয় উপাদেয়, মায়াতে তার ছায়া মাত্র কিন্তু সব হেয়।
All right. Now in this section, he speaks about the Batulas, the madmen, who are the Mayavadis, who have no entrance into the rasas in the spiritual world. The section is called Relishing Transcendental Mellows. Only a madman ignorantly declares everything in the spiritual world is formless. God has no personal qualities, for ultimately there is only a limitless void. So that's the declaration of the madmen. God is the storehouse of transcendental mellows. Verily, he is rasa itself. In the Sanskrit is raso vai sa, from the Taittiriya Upanishad 271. The intelligent devotees who ecstatically relish his mellows render service to him in submission. They serve him in the mellows of neutrality, servitude, friendship, parental affection, and in the rasa that is the finest of all, the quintessential conjugal mellow. Quintessential is shrestha. It's a very big word that they used. When expressed within the spiritual world, all of these mellows are thoroughly relishable. But in the material world, being only distorted reflections, these mellows all become repulsive. Krishna Ye.
কৃষ্ণ যেই ভজে সেই হয়তো চতুর, মায়া যেই ভজে সেই হয়তো ফতুর। ফতুর হইবার লাগি অনিত্য বিলাস, সম্বন্ধ জ্ঞানহীনের হয় কর্মবন্ধ ফাঁস। অর্জুন করয়ে যুদ্ধ দুর্যোধন করে, অর্জুন ভক্ত শ্রেষ্ঠ দুর্যোধন মরে। এক যুদ্ধ ক্ষেত্রে দুই প্রিয়া প্রিয় হয়, বুদ্ধিমান লোক যেই বুঝিতে পারয়।
So here Prabhupada is speaking about the two different types of people who are either chatur or fatur. Chatur means wise and fatur means poverty-stricken. And he's giving an example of Arjun. Whoever worships Krishna in devotion is truly wise. Whoever worships Maya in illusion is truly poor. Now that in itself, because it's poetry, it's so beautiful. And each couplet we can use even in our preaching because it's so succinct. Eloquence means the smallest number of words to express your what you want to say. So it's so eloquent. Whoever worships Krishna in devotion is truly wise. He's chatur. Whoever worships Maya in illusion is truly poor. That's fatur. Attempting to enjoy fleeting fantasies, the fallen soul thereby becomes destitute. Bereft of the knowledge of his eternal relationship with Krishna, he is ensnared in the noose of his own fruitive reactions. Arjun fought in the ancient battle of Kurukshetra, and Duryodhana also fought in the same battle. Arjun was the best of devotees. He was chatur, whereas Duryodhana simply perished. These two, though on the same battlefield, were different. One was a friend of Krishna, the other a foe. Persons who possess intelligence can clearly understand the difference. So now Srila Prabhupada, for us, Bhagavad Gita is the basis of our spiritual life, the ABCs. If you don't know your ABCs, then there's no way that you can go on to read, speak, nothing. We all have to know our ABCs very well. So now that Prabhupada has given an introduction of the difference between Maya and being Krishna conscious, he's giving us an example between Arjun and Duryodhana, and now he'll go on to explain the qualities of a pure devotee such as Arjun. Number 10. Section 10. Oh. Oh, I'm sorry, I got completely, sorry, I could go on. I didn't even didn't even put the clock out, I was so excited. Excuse me. Okay, we'll have to continue tomorrow, next week. Hare Krishna. Sorry.